the UFC has an Islam Makhachev problem. You know, this is not anything to do with the fighter. He has limited availability, and that's kind of created a logjam in the division, especially with Arman Tsarukyan no longer getting the next title shot, according to Dana White, following UFC 311. Dana White does not appear to be thrilled with Arman Tsarukyan, given his last-minute exit from the UFC 311 card. This is following, being suspended for punching a fan, at UFC 300. He also did not take the fight that was offered to him for UFC 302 to fight at UFC 302. So this was, this is a long time coming here. I think Dana has just been kind of frustrated with Arman Tsarukyan, and he's had his final straw here. But after Arman Tsarukyan, realistically, Charles Oliveira is that next contender. But Arman Tsarukyan has beat Charles Oliveira. So Charles getting that next title shot is kind of strange without that Islam and Arman fight happening. But Charles Oliveira, rightful next contender in that situation. Another issue is Islam Makhachev's limited availability. Realistically, Islam fights twice a year, early in the year, and then we don't really see him again until around October, typically. Given his schedule. So if Islam's not going to fight again till October, if Charles doesn't want to wait, and if Charles has to wait, he said that he wants to fight earlier in this year, and the fight that he would like to make is, him versus Max Holloway for the BMF title. And I mean, what an awesome opportunity for the UFC this would be. Charles Oliveira and Max Holloway are two of the most entertaining fighters in the history of the UFC, the history of mixed martial arts. They have fought once before. This was kind of a different Charles Oliveira. He was injured throughout the fight. He did not continue the fight. The fight was stopped. Max Holloway was the winner. But that was before Charles Oliveira was, the champion Charles Oliveira. This was before Charles Oliveira was in his prime. Charles Oliveira's rise in the UFC is such an amazing watch. If you think of fighters who, maybe who have one or two losses, who have been on the come up, who have so much potential, and now you don't think they're anything special because they've lost a fight or two. Look at Charles Oliveira. Charles Oliveira lost a string of fights. And Charles Oliveira completely changed his career and evolved, and has become just one of the most complete mixed martial artists in the history of martial arts, particularly in the history of the UFC. So Charles Oliveira, is such a talented fighter. He's a different guy from that first Max Holloway fight. Max Holloway still the BMF. Despite his loss from Ilia Topuria, the BMF title was not on the line for that Ilia Topuria fight. So Max still has a title to defend. And at 155, that's the perfect division for him to defend that title. There's a lot of BMFs in that division. Michael Chandler, Michael Chandler versus Max Holloway, that's the fight we wanted to see throughout the year. Michael Chandler, obviously a really entertaining fighter as well. So Max has some options for that next BMF title defense. Chandler's a great fighter. Charles Oliveira is a great fighter. But I think no one deserves the next crack at the BMF title more than Charles Oliveira. Charles Oliveira's been still winning fights recently. Charles Oliveira just beat Michael Chandler at UFC 309 in November at Madison Square Garden. He dominated Michael Chandler. He won pretty much every round of that fight. He looked fantastic. And that was going to be the number one contender fight. But what do you do when there's a situation where there's a guy who is at the top of the ranks in the division but has lost the title and is really not at that championship level just yet? Technically, I would still say Arman should be in front of Charles, given the victory at UFC 300. So when that's kind of the case, I think this is kind of the perfect example for Charles to fight for the BMF title, especially because he's such a massive star still. Charles Oliveira and Max Holloway as a BMF title fight, that is a headline pay-per-view event, and probably going to be one of the bigger events of the year. That's one of the best options for the UFC to have a headliner in 2025. They talked. Max Holloway is interested in this fight as well. he said International Fight Weekend would be an awesome time for this fight to take place. That's usually at the end of June or in July, and that would just be an awesome fight. And if that happens earlier in the year, maybe if Charles wins, he gets the crack at the championship in the lightweight division, and that would kind of make that fight more interesting. Now that Charles has 2 wins, the BMF title, that just kind of makes that fight much more appealing. When Max won the BMF title, how much did that elevate his status to fight Ilia Topuria for the title at 145? I mean, that made that fight super compelling, super interesting, and super high in demand. So I think this would help Charles significantly if he wants to get that next shot at the lightweight title, especially if Islam decides to take a little break, and then fight in October, and that kind of would create more demand for Islam's next challenger. Because right now there's really not a whole lot of excitement for who Islam can face next, especially with Arman kind of back to the drawing board. And this kind of opens up opportunities as well. If Charles doesn't want that quick turnaround, maybe Ilia slides in and gets that shot. Ilia versus Islam is probably the biggest fight that the UFC can make in the lightweight division. So the UFC, if they make Charles and Max, Ilia and Islam in 2025, those are 2 massive fights for the UFC to make, and those are some money fights that would sell a lot of pay-per-views and get a lot of attention, a lot of eyes on the UFC product. So I think those are the best direction of where they can go. I know Ilia hasn't really, completely cleaned out that featherweight division. That featherweight division has a lot of interesting names in it. Diego Lopez is another one, for example. I think it would be great for Ilia to stay in that division. Maybe he beats Volk one more time. And then he goes and faces Diego. I don't know. He's talked about how he wants to move up to lightweight. These are things that are really unknown at this time. However, I think despite the fact that Ilia hasn't cleaned out that division, I think something that helps him is that he's defeated the 2 greatest fighters in that division's history. So who's gonna beat him? That's kind of another logic of that way to look at things. And I think Ilia is ready for 155. And I know it's something that we don't all want to hear, but in my opinion, Ilia is ready for 155, and Ilia and Islam is the fight to make. That's something that excites me. It's a new challenge for Islam. It's not a rematch. I mean, Charles and Islam fought at UFC 280. We know how that played out, and it just kind of gives Charles to build back up, get that BMF title. At worst case, it's just another title for Charles to have in his career. It's the BMF title is an honor, right? That's something that's like a fan favorite title in a way. That means like we view you as one of the more entertaining fighters, in the sport. And Charles deserves that title, shot anyway. And him and Max is a great fight, and that's a fight that I kind of would like to break down, study, and I at this point I think that's a 50-50 fight, but it would be an interesting fight to examine and form an opinion on. I guess on the top of my head I would lean Charles, just due to his superior grappling, but that would be an exciting fight, and honestly, now that this fight has been talked about and both fighters seem to want it, I think this would kind of go to the top of the list of my favorite fights that the UFC can book in 2025. So Charles Oliveira, Max Holloway for the BMF title. Let me know what you think of that fight in the comments. If you think that's the fight that the UFC should make, is Charles Oliveira the next guy you want to see fight for the BMF title? Would you rather see Michael Chandler in the mix or somebody else? Just let me know in the comments below. And thanks for watching.